Valentine Chapel Cup, which will go off at 3:30, and 3:30 they will race 3 miles through the open bay here, past Mamico Hill, and all the way up to Bartlett's Cove. The conditions here are a little rougher in this open section of the race course. We've got a nice tail breeze blowing. It's sort of puffy from the west, so it'll probably require a bit more sharpness in the overall rowing in order to be moving quickly here through the first mile of this second varsity race. And while we wait, I thought for all of the listeners out there and all those that are sitting at Red Top and at Gales Ferry, to tell the audience a little bit about a wonderful event that happened this afternoon as we dedicated a memorial to Harry Parker, the legendary coach at Harvard, who from '63 to 2013 coached the Harvard crews here at Red Top and obviously through the seasons. So a beautiful sitting wall was dedicated, a wall that was in serpentine shape, in the shape of an oar, under full power, with the deflection that was best characterized by a picture that resides in Newell of a wonderful guy named Scott Steckety, who in '68 was known to break Carlish oars with rapidity. Anyway, it was a great evening. It was a great event. A couple hundred people showed up, and Kathy Keeler, Harry's wife, and David Parker, his son, had some wonderful remarks, as did Nick Bancroft, who rode for Harry in 1963, and Andy Holmes, who's the stroke of this year's varsity crew. All made some wonderful remarks about Harry and the success he had here on the Thames. Lots of changes now with crew, with the coaches, with Charlie Butt coming on board, the very successful lightweight coach taking over the varsity program, Michiel Bartman, a 2-time gold medalist from the Netherlands, who is across the river at Well Boathouse coaching the lightweight women, has moved over to take on the lightweight men. So it's a sea change at Harvard, and all of the alumni are in full support, but anxiously awaiting to see how the results of this coaching change will go forward. While we're waiting, I thought Andy and I might talk a little bit about how this game has changed over the years, specifically as it relates to what I call the physiology or the characteristics of the men who row today, whether they're lightweights or heavyweights. And certainly one of the characteristics that I've found to be characteristic of the winners is the height of the crews, and certainly the crews have gotten taller over the years.
Yeah, no doubt. If you look back on the original lineups, on Lake Winnipesaukee and subsequent, most of the original rowers who took place in this regatta were lightweight size, even smaller than some of today's lightweights, 5'8", 5'9". Yeah. Most of the lightweight crews that you see are 6 foot, 6'1", 5'11", that sort of thing. So absolutely, as the population has gotten bigger through better nutrition, sanitation, and so forth, you also see that reflected here on the river. But the game is still essentially the same. The equipment is better. Technology and training and physiology has improved so much. But it really is a strength-to-weight ratio. You don't see any football linemen out here.
That coming from a lightweight coach.
Exactly. Right? Yeah, absolutely. We look at that all the time. I mean, you don't see NFL offensive linemen here in these shells. The 300-pounders would be most unwise to put in the shell. So the game has changed quite a bit. The players are bigger, but there is a limit at some point to how big they should get. And if you can increase your strength-to-weight ratio, I suppose the boat manufacturers can build bigger boats to accommodate those guys, but there seems to be an expansion, but not an over-expansion as you see in some other sports.
Well, let me ask you a question, because you're exactly the right person to ask. You've been coaching at Yale for many years. How has the training changed? My sort of sense is the volume has gotten significantly more in terms of how much time these guys are spending on the water. And we have a wonderful guy that rows out of Cambridge, a guy named Andrew Campbell, whose name I'm sure you know. And he went down to New Zealand for a winter, and you got the impression that the amount of volume was doubled what anything we were doing.
Right.
And do you find this to be characteristic?
Yeah, I think if you're basically the training has expanded to become year-round. I mean, the anecdotal stories from, we didn't used to do anything in the fall, Not we, meaning Yale, but all
Right.
oarsmen. In fact, Harry was one of those guys that started more significant fall training. And, the head of the Charles has only been around, 30 years now? It's their anniversary?
50.
Sorry, 50? It's still a young race, according to this one. And, that in the 40s, there was no racing in the fall. It was all very casual, very gentlemanly, a lot of champagne.
Boys in the boat.
Right,
Boys in the boat.
Exactly. And now the training really has to be year-round if you're a serious athlete and want to do well in this sport.
Well, serious athletes are now on the line and backed up to the boats. And quickly, let me give you, for this 3-mile race, the members of the second varsity, I guess you'd have to say, from Harvard. The coxswain is Joel Bateman, a freshman from Auckland, New Zealand. Stroke, Chase Buckholtz, a freshman from Providence, Rhode Island. Rory Glover, a sophomore from Church Point, Australia. Henry Kennelly, my nephew, freshman from Manchester, Mass., Manchester by the Sea. Ben Litton, senior from Queenstown, New Zealand. James Crawford, Crawford in the 4-seat, a sophomore from Kew East in Australia. Matt Carter, freshman, Chelmsford, England. Sean my wife has to help me with the French. Vendril is a freshman from Montfort-la-Marie in France. And then in the bow seat, Ross Jarvis, a freshman from Manly, Australia.
I'll go over the Yale crew now as the crews are lining up. We have a white flag up, which means the crews are aligned. We'll get to the lineup in a second for the Yale show. We do have 3 miles to talk about that. This time, though, Yale is on the west side, and Harvard is on the east side, racing upstream.
And this wind is a good 10 knots cross tail now, so it's going to be throwing these boats down to the starboard side and make them a little more difficult to row.
At least early, yeah. I think the water down by the finish line, though, is very, very good.
Well, how does that affect the race? I mean, are you going to save something when the water is flat and then and take the rating up when it gets calm, or what would be the race plan if you were coaching either of these two boats?
Well, I think the basics are still the same. You have to move the boat in whatever conditions you can, and you have to be the first to realize the water is getting better and start to move a little bit sooner than the other crew if there's a move necessary. If you're in the lead, certainly you'll enjoy the better conditions and you can keep an eye on the other crew. And we have the red flag up and we have a start.
Great.
There we go. That happened in a rush. I'm sure the athletes, though, feel like they've been sitting on the line forever.
Yeah, it's quite, the way this happens, for those who are unfamiliar, is they back into these stake boats that hold the stern, and with this crosswind, the bows tend to get blown to the east side, and so it's a bit tricky to try to hold them on the course in anticipation of the start. And we see a little bit of white water here from the Harvard boat scrubbing a little bit in the heavier water.
Yeah, not too bad. I mean, both crews are around 40, 41. A lot less than they were announced last week at the IRA, where they were saying crews were starting at 45 to 48. But right now, as the crews come past us and the sun glints on the Thames River, it looks like Harvard has about a half a length in this JV race for the Chapel Trophy.
Glints? I didn't know you were a poet, Andy.
Well, it's burning my eyes, so it sponsors a little bit of...
So Harvard is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seats in the lead now. Moving well on the Yale boat. Both boats are about the same stroke rating.
Now, Harvard has a length in about 1:12. It's starting very well for the Crimson right here. Yale's got to do something. They're stroked by Adam Smith, not the economist, but the oarsman from Auckland, New Zealand. And he's got a task because he can't see Harvard anymore. The coxswain, Chris Carruthers, can. And he's got to keep Yale in contact. We saw this happen in the 2-miler where Harvard got a length and basically held it. Now, these guys won't necessarily know what happened in the previous race, so Chris has to do a good job of keeping them motivated. Okay, Harvard's got a length early, but let's see if we can stop their move, hang on for a little while, and then slowly make our comeback, particularly as they get past Mammocoke Hill and the water starts to get a little bit better. The 7th seat is Nate Goodman for Yale, one of the 2 freshmen in the boat. He's 6'4", 195 from Montclair, New Jersey. We'll keep going down the lineup as we try to catch up to the crews here. And now it looks like Yale has done a decent job of stopping the Harvard move. And the question I have is Harvard content just to sit on them by a length? Sometimes it is more relaxing just to sit on somebody and not keep continually trying to move away. That might be Harvard's plan right now. Well, certainly Yale doesn't want to let Harvard get any further away. They're through the first post in under 2.5 minutes. I'm not sure we saw a record. Well, in fact, I know we didn't see a record in the first 2-miler.
It was almost 30 seconds off. Yale now to 33, and we'll catch Harvard. One more. At a 31. So they're down at a pace which they should be easily able to handle for the body of this race.
Well, the two crews are both getting into their 3-mile pace, and we'll go down the boat a little bit further. Speaking of taller people, there's a middle of the boat here for the Yale JV that's quite big. Thomas Pagel, the 6th seed, a sophomore, 6'4", 220 from Abingdon School in Oxford, or in England rather. He grew up in Oxford. 5, Clemens Barth, a junior, 6'4", 195 from Berlin. 4th seed, Robin Molen-Griegel, a freshman, 6'2", 198 from Sydney, Australia. So there's your huge engine room. They are 6'2" to 6'4", and all about 2 bills. And Harvard is still sitting on Yale, maybe a little bit open water now. The Harvard coxswain seems to be edging a little more to the east side to get through the markers.
Maybe get through that, get a little sooner, get to that flat water. Though it's as they go under the shoulder here of Mamico Hill, if you will, the water really goes dead flat, and it's almost absolutely no waves on it at all. So I'm sure both crews will try to make a big move here with 2 miles, at the 2-mile mark, a mile gone, to really try to, in Harvard's case, hold off Yale, and Yale to get back into this race.
Well, you know, Harvard has made a huge effort here early. Now the question is, are they just cruising right now, or is that the extent of their move, and can Yale start to move back? We're entering into the Mamico Hill. We got 2 miles to go now. Harvard, 1 mile down.
Harvard at 34.
And it's about a length still. There's still 2 miles to go.
34 at Yale. 34 at Yale. 34 and 34. Stroke for stroke.
What you find, too, is that the distance is intimidating. I mean, it's not that crews around the world don't race 3 miles or 5K, but it's still intimidating when it's a mass race and the opponent is right over there. A little bobble there from the starboard side for Yale, even though it's nicer water. But you also, when you're behind like this, it's also intimidating to try to, okay, we have to go harder. That means I have to go harder, and we have to overcome this early deficit.
Yeah. Well, Yale does have the slight advantage of being on the east side and therefore the inside of the turn, and that's probably worth a half a length here as they come through and by the submarine base. Maybe that will be a little bit of a lift to get them a little stronger through this now 3rd half mile of the race.
Right. Yale is at 32, 33. In that range. And again, this lineup is different from the lineup that raced at the IRA.
Yeah.
I know the stroke of this boat is now the stroke of the Varsity, for example. So one of the other difficulties that Yale is finding, and I'm not sure what the changes have been in the Harvard shell, but the Yale crew has a new stroke. Well, and that's different, and he's certainly being put to the test today.
Well, I think that point is well taken, and as you well know, rowing together is critical in this sport, and all these crews have changed dramatically. There's been, I know, some been illness in the Harvard boats. The lineups that are in the program for this regatta are completely and utterly wrong. So there's been a lot of change from the first boat all the way to the 3rd boat. Freshmen moving around, seniors moving around, all trying to find that bit of speed that will carry them through this regatta.
Well, these two crews raced each other last week at the IRA, and this is a different result here as we have we're approached the halfway point of the race, and Harvard through about now.
Well, the IRA, I think this.
And just excuse me, Charlie. Yale through about now.
I do believe that this Harvard boat is substantially changed from that which was rowed at the IRA, and they didn't have and maybe as a result, the changes that were made were a result of the fact that the JV crew was not a successful crew at the IRA.
Well, it certainly gives the coach license to change things up.
Yeah.
Particularly if there has been some illness in the Harvard camp, that might have been a factor in the IRA performance as well. You never know. They weren't sick enough to take themselves out, but it certainly was enough to be off. Right now, Harvard is pushing out to a greater lead than they've had throughout this whole race. and they are looking very good here.
Yeah, I'd call it 2 lengths of open, if not a little bit more. Again, our perspective is from dead astern, so it's hard to give you exactly what the split is, but just looking at it now, there's a good deal of open water between the 2 boats.
Coxswain Chris Carruthers from Yale is trying to keep his crew right on the center line and then just edge a little bit to starboard just to maintain some type of contact with Harvard, but he needs to steer slightly back to starboard here from our perspective.
I have Harvard now at 32, 33. And Yale at 34 plus. You can see that now as I think we look down at Yale is trying to make a push here, maintaining a bit higher rating than Harvard, try to get back into this race.
It's going to be a challenge to get back into it. I mean, the Harvard crew, did not have that successful in IRA. I'm sure none of those athletes in there were happy with where they finished up. And this is a nice way to come back.
Yeah.
It's less than a week. There's a huge opponent to defeat, and they're looking to go out on a triumphant note here.
Yeah. I'd say again that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 freshmen in this boat. Now, admittedly, as we talked a little bit earlier, many of them, with the exception of Kennelly, have been rowing for a long time. We take a look at these guys from England, the guys from Germany. Rowing starts much earlier in their careers. They row a lot of sculling boats, which gives them the advantage of the feel of a small boat and the feel of moving a single, maybe a double, etc. And I think that gives them a great advantage, having had that experience in single sculls or in sculling. Period. Is that something that Andy, you look for when you're recruiting a sculling experience?
Sure. People who love rowing will find a way to get on the water and get in a shell of any type. And yeah, absolutely, that's a factor. I'm not sure that that's why Harvard is defeating Yale in this particular race, but in general, sure, coaches love rowers who row.
Yeah.
Not to put too simple a point on it. Harvard now rowing lower and lower, just in control of this race. Congrats to them. This is it's not over. I don't want to jack buck things here and call the race before, or call the contest over before it's over. But right now, as
the fat lady hasn't sung
no,
yet.
She hasn't. But Harvard blade work very good. There's a nice swing to the shell.
We do remember, Andy, a couple of years ago when one of the guys in the Harvard boat exhausted himself, and Yale rowed through them in the end. So,
well, I'm sure that's been on the mind of all the coaches here, how the recovery has been from that three-day regatta of the IRA. Now, the weather was decent for the IRA. It wasn't outrageously hot as it has been in past years, but still, that's 3 days of hard racing, maybe even 4 races total if you go through the reps, and that might be a concern. You have to rest up for that regatta, but also gear up a little bit for the longer distance and get in some base pace work. So I'm sure it's a tricky situation for both Coach Budd and Coach Gladstone to get it right and not overtrain the guys or do too much, but yet stay sharp after a tough regatta.
Let's stick on that point for a moment. I think Yale's been down here at Gales Ferry for a number of weeks and trying to find the right balance in the workouts to both race effectively the 2,000 meters at the intercollegiate regatta and then can race 2, 3, 4 miles here is a delicate balance. Something that Brown, for example, and Washington, for example, and Cal didn't have to worry about. They could focus all of their efforts at the 2,000 meters, and you could see, and watching the finals at the IRA with Washington first and then Brown charging through Cal with Harvard and Yale falling off the back might suggest that we didn't get it quite right.
Well, it's sports, it's sports, and you get result. Not everybody can finish first. There is going to be an ordinal finish, first, second, third, fourth, fifth. And, these two crews, they know about this race. It's not a surprise. It's very important to both schools. And I know from Coach Parker, this race was very important to him.
Absolutely.
And all he cared about was this race. And if the crew did well at the IRA, well, that's great.
Yep.
He wanted to win the sprints and win the boat race, and not in that order. It was mostly win the boat race and then win the sprints. And then the IRA, which is a rather recent development for Yale and Harvard, that would be nice too. And Harvard has won the IRA national championship a few times as well. And this race is most likely going to the Crimson here, as they can really stretch it out and feel pretty good about the way their season is concluding. I'm not sure this crew is racing internationally. Are they done for the year, Charlie?
Well, they're the Friends of Harvard Rowing indeed met with the coaches a couple of weeks ago, and based on the performance of the varsity crew, agreed to send the varsity crew as an 8 to the Henley Royal Regatta. Now, I learned today in talking with the coaches that that's now changed. Some of the men in the Harvard varsity boat want to race in the under 23 World Championships for their native countries. So that has made a change, and now my understanding is that 2 4s have been created that will go and race. I imagine one will be in the Stewards Cup, which is the sort of second level race for 4s, and I'm not sure exactly what the cup is for the 4 with, but that's my understanding that a straight 4 and a 4 with will be representing Harvard in Henley.
Presumably, if some of those athletes are going to the U23, some of the guys in this boat will be going.
Yeah.
Well, we're approaching the finish line here as Yale passes by the rock. Harvard is past them, and we're over the 14-minute mark. It'll be around 14:20 or so. Maybe a little faster than that as we look for the yellow flag to indicate the finish. Right there, 14:15.7 for Harvard. There's not a lot of cheering from the Harvard crew. They're just finishing and bent over their oars, as you would expect after a 3-mile race. And there's Yale, 14:33.1. So it's a 17.4 second victory for Harvard.
So once again, Andy, let me just get those down. So
the Harvard time unofficially is 14:15.7. And the Yale time was 14:33.1.
So Harvard wins the second varsity F. Valentine Chapel Cup with about a 17-second margin. And again, given all that wind at the beginning, I would have thought that this would be a faster race, because the record for this was is held by Harvard for a 2011 crew at 13:38. So again, these though the tailwind we should be helping and the incoming tide should be helping, we're not seeing as fast as we might out here. Anyway, that's the second race of the day, and we'll proceed back all the way to the Gold Star Bridge for the 4-miler, which will start at 4:30. So we'll be back before then, talk a little bit more about this race and the coaches and the records and the performance of both the Harvard and the Yale varsities over the course of the season. Back to you at the studio.